Welcome to In the Zone, brought to you by U.S. Construction Zone, bringing you strategies for success with construction innovators and change makers, including In the Zone peer-nominated national award winners. Here are your hosts, Jeremy and Valerie Owens.
Valerie Owens. I'm here with Jeremy.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for being here on In the Zone podcast.
We have a very exciting guest today, René Morkos, who has developed Alice, which is an artificial intelligence for the construction industry, and I'm excited to get to know him.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be way above my pay grade, basically, is what it's going to be.
So as we prepare to talk to René, one of the things that we are finding in the construction industry, or really any industry globally, is that technology has really kind of stuck its foot in the door and is heating up.
Yeah, I would say it's heating up. It's obviously here to stay, but there's so many different things that we could talk about. I think the first one that I wanted to just mention, and we'll put the link to this article because it's a great article. It's just we don't have enough time to go through it all. In its article called "Construction Technology to Watch in 2021" by Big Rants. And what's cool about it is they go through like the top 10 things they're seeing, and this first one of augmented reality or virtual reality is so cool because you're going to be able to put on, these goggles and basically walk a construction site finished. So you're going to be able to see, oh, this flow doesn't work. We need to change this. We need to change that. It's going to help with safety. It's going to help with making sure that things aren't built the wrong way. I just had a virtual reality experience the other day at my brother's house where I put one of those things on for the first time, and and it was a thing where we go on a plank and you jump off basically into nothingness, and I fell. I fully knew I was in virtual reality, but apparently my body didn't know that. So I think just coming off that experience I had a couple weeks ago, I'm like, wow, that would be so cool to walk a construction site before it's done.
Right. To make changes based on what you see, and what a gift to be able to offer clients.
Yeah, here's it finished. To come into my office here. Mm-hmm. Maybe hold someone's hand and don't jump out of the windows.
Right. But lots of times I think, on a smaller scale, we have just individual customers, and then on a large scale, you have those multi-million-dollar projects. Sorry, my brain. But some of the frustration I think lies in not being able to imagine what it will look like when it's completed. I know, at least for me as a homeowner. So how nice to be able to, when those frustrations begin, say, "Hey, we've got this.
Yeah.
Come join our little world here."
Put these on.
Yeah.
Put these on. You owe me $1 million. Yeah.
So what else? So VR, obviously is going to be huge as we move forward in the with technology. What other things do you see?
Obviously there's a ton of them. The robots will be huge, with, not only mainly in the pre-construction to start. So, building things before they hit to the job site, but even the robots on sites now that are going to be helping, lift and carry and do some of the manual things that are tougher for humans. So that would be cool to see. And then drones we've talked about on previous podcasts with Tony Rader and what they're using for roofs. And we're seeing that from a siding and windows perspective, where we don't even have to go to homes all the time. We can have the measurements sent to us. That's going to be really cool and efficient. And then the artificial intelligence and machine learning is what our guest René is going to be talking about. So I'll let him do the explaining because I have no idea. Still don't. So that's going to be great. And then, there's so many. Modular construction, it's just, in California, we have so many modulars now because the cost of building is so high that even after all these fires we've had, people are not building back with regular construction. They're going with a modular home. And they look great now, and they're way more efficient and way less cost. So some homeowners are like, I can't afford that $800,000 home. Now I'm going to have to build the modular, and it still looks great.
Yeah.
but that's going to be kind of a cool wave to see where that goes as well.
Mm-hmm. Some other things that they mentioned that you've probably seen on a smaller scale are, 3D printing, building information modeling, which is like creating the digital representation of what a finished project would look like, or really the entire process of building. So, a good friend of mine, Carrie, my friend Carrie, had sent me something when I was going through a tough kind of question in my life, and she had sent me this thing that said, we have to, I can't remember it exactly, but it says something to the effect of, we have to rewrite the idea that new or change is something to fear. And I just really like that. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but it actually is very true. Sometimes we look at things like AI or robots or, 3D printing, and it's different than what we've experienced before, but yet there's a beautiful world out there that's, just waiting to be moved into.
Yeah.
If we can let go of what has been done and move into what will be done.
Yeah, I think the ones that adopt the technology, I mean, where you can, obviously, these aren't cheap, so it's not like everyone's going to go be buying a robot tomorrow, although I'd love one to clean our house. But those that can adopt these things are going to be winning. I mean, obviously, we have an aging construction industry, so as they retire, then the new generation is going to be responsible for carrying the torch and saying, hey, we need to do it this way.
Yeah.
And we need to listen to them because I don't have all the answers, but I know everything that we've added technology side to our business has always been a good thing and always been more efficient. So dang it, it'll be fun to talk to Rene and get his insight on what he's doing at Alice Technologies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, all right, so now on to our guest. Our special guest, René Morkos, is founder and inventor of the world's first artificial intelligence software application to optimize construction called Alice Technologies. He is second-generation civil engineer with over 15 years of construction industry experience that is divided between industry and academia. His professional experience includes working as a project manager in Afghanistan, underwater pipeline construction, automation engineering, ERP systems implementations, professor at Stanford University, and various virtual design and construction projects. Please help me welcome René Morkos.
Good morning. Great.
Thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So with me, I'd like to get started because I am a third generation in remodeling myself. So I'm always fascinated to hear one's upbringing, their story. I know you're second generation. So tell me a little bit about your childhood and about how that experience kind of molded you into who you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So when I graduated high school, my dad gave me a good piece of advice. Look, son, study anything you want, just don't do civil engineering. I was like, all right, I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, right? I was kind of confused before this, but now it's clear. So, yeah, I mean, my parents, escaped communism. We ended up in Beirut, unfortunately, during the war. And so I got to see a very destructive side of our species. So I think that for me, reconstruction of the ability to build was something that was important. I think that's one part of the reason why I went to Afghanistan, right? And in Afghanistan, you get to experience the kind of golden era of civil engineering, if you will. The sort of late 1800s, early 1900s, right? When civil engineering was kind of this really cutting edge field, people were just figuring it out, and the Eiffel Tower was getting built, bridges were being built. People started to understand how to build large, complex structures. And sort of in Afghanistan, you really get to push back, nature in some ways and build critical infrastructure. We built the first window doors factory in the country. We built military bases for security, which I think a lot of people are watching the news and kind of see how that's important, right? Yeah. I repaired an RPG attack on the runway and on the airport, right, which was 25% of the airport's capacity, 33% I should be precise. So yeah, I got to experience a lot of really fun stuff. I like to build stuff. Like that always just jazzed me, right? I remember driving with my dad and he or even my mom, like he would point out like, hey, I built that. built that, or I built that, and I was like, hey, it's kind of cool, like that, villa, that structure, that office, whatever the heck it was small projects, right? I mean, he was a small time contractor, but I was like, that's going to be there when he won't, all right? And I thought that was really cool, like the idea that you go and pour concrete, right? And you go home, like that day for me when we poured concrete, the fact that something is there that wasn't there before and it's big, right? And it's going to be there for a long time like that till now, I think it's just really cool. That's simple.
Yeah, that is cool.
Did he, why did he not want you to go into that field? Or...
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I think that for the same reason that and that kind of ties into one of the reasons we founded Alice, right? I think that, he saw that the job was really stressful, right? It's got a lot of hours, and it's not one of the best paying jobs.
Yeah.
Right? And so he was like, lots of stress, lots of responsibility, you're not close to the honeypot, right? Maybe you should be an investment banker, right?
Right.
And so, I think that that's kind of the thing that's changing right now, right? 2017, this, what I call the renaissance of construction, right? And the 2017 was when all this cash got poured into it, right? And the numbers, 6.4 billion over the last, I think since 2014. I was looking at Construction Insights. 2017 was when it sort of ticked up. There was kind of a jump. But if you look at the Katerra investment, it was almost 2 billion, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah. Without the Katerra investment, it was, hovering somewhere around $1 billion that year alone. And that's kind of when I think the world woke up to, oh my God, this is going to be the next wave of excuse me, cool shit that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like this is going to be it. And
right.
So, so my dad, I think, at the time, gave me the advice that he saw, right, which is he didn't see it as a field that was cutting edge. He didn't see it as a field that was, innovating, that was growing, that was kind of, vibrant, and it was highly stressful. And, the thing that if you look at construction folk, like we tend to work really long hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Compare like the average construction person, like it is regular that you are in the office. I used to, 8 p.m., 7 p.m., especially when things are going sideways, right? There's some delay, something needs to be, caught up, you need to accelerate or something like that. Very typical, right? And so that really was one of the reasons for founding Alice, which was, we wanted to bring, the cutting edge technology, right? And so during the research and the PhD, I basically converted construction into an algorithmic problem.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that's significant is that you can suddenly unlock 30 years of research from computer science, from operations research, from management science and engineering, from industrial engineering. Like suddenly all of that stuff becomes applicable.
Right.
Right.
And I thought that was a worthwhile thing to do, right? Because it really transforms the industry, into a modern industry. And I think it's happening, right? It's not just Alice. There's other companies that I'm sure have been on this podcast, right? That are working exactly that.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, I love your perspective. It was interesting hearing you explain it after, reading some of your past interviews and, but hearing it come from you, it's so illuminated how you have taken what could be seen as just a trade and really taken your education and combined it with that and made it into this Renaissance-esque movement. Mm-hmm. And so I want to ask, before we get into talking about Alice, how has your education, and tell us about it, but how has your education changed your future in this industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. My dad had a PhD, mm-hmm. right? And interestingly enough, because we had to escape the war in Beirut, he didn't get to he was a professor at a university, right? Working for hello? Yeah. He was a professor at a university, and he was working for a large sort of contractor, one of the largest in the country. When we sort of escaped the war, he kind of lost the professorship. He didn't sort of end up, working, kind of closely in the field. He ended up founding a number of companies that, did retail and sort of small-time contract and stuff like that. But I saw, like, he sort of told me that the thing that the PhD gave him was a way of thinking, right? And so for me, I didn't mind, like I remember when I sort of, said, hey, I want to go do a PhD, every person I talked to was like, that's the dumbest thing. Why would you, like, construction, PhD, like, yeah, if you were in biotech, yeah, we get it, right? If you were in PhD physics, yeah, we get it. If you like, people gave me all these examples, but like construction management, like, no, right?
Right.
And, to your point, I mean, I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the fact that like, I think construction scheduling and optimization is the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And if you and truthfully, like, if you look at the problem that we're solving, we solve the hardest operational problems in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were building, like I was building, a $350 million gas refinery, you're burning through $1.8 million a day.
Yeah.
Think about that. Think about, that's the capital that you're burning through. You've got 6,000 people on site. Every single one of those people is doing something. Every single one of those people is moving equipment, labor, right? 2 million documents, right? That are basically, shuffled, ordered, verified, versioned, all of that stuff, right? So right. The size of these problems is incredibly large. That is why we haven't been able to digitize it. Yeah. The other stuff, the stuff that was easier, got on the digitization block sooner. And so to answer the question of how the education came into it, like, you've really got to hand it to Silicon Valley and Stanford, which is, I studied at SciFi. I studied at the Center for Integrated Facility Engineering. And anybody listening, you should check it out, scifi.stanford.edu, cife.stanford.edu. One of the oldest research institutes in the country, right, for construction management. And it's by studying there and them pushing me to kind of like keep pushing the bleeding edge, and then using a lot of the knowledge that was in that institution from the folks that came before me, because I built my PhD on top of 4 other PhDs. Mm-hmm. Just kind of, I built this, combined them, and built this layer on top. But to answer your question, it was undoubtedly the education, right? It was undoubtedly the education that sort of, put me in that position. And it's not uncommon, right? If you look at Obama, he went to Harvard. If you look at Condoleezza Rice, she went to Stanford. If you look at, like, there is a higher chance that these institutions are going to push you to go do something big, right?
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, like, sure, I can say that, I work hard. I used to clock 20-hour days, right? Right. But yeah, it's the education, right? And it's funny, like, so many people, when I said, hey, I'm going to go do a PhD in construction, everyone's like, oh, that's dumb, right? But it turns out that you can do some cool stuff in it. And I did this thing called an industrial PhD, right? Which is you do 6 months on, 6 months off. And so I basically, and that's a really, anyone that's listening, like, that's really cool. Because I was like, if anything's going to make you stupid, it's 5 years of school.
Right.
True.
And so, I was like, I'm going to lose all my, like, business knowledge, right? If I sit in a lab for 5 years, like, I won't know how to talk to people. I won't know how to, negotiate. I won't, lose all those skills. So it's, I remember telling my advisor, I said, hey, I want to do like 6 months on, 6 months off. And the beautiful thing about Stanford is, like, I think most other places would be like, what the heck? No, you're an academic. That's it.
Right.
Whereas, at Stanford, they're like, cool. Like, it's going to probably take you twice as long. And it didn't. Right. I was doing, 6 months, I'd go and consult for this company, in the Netherlands. And it was really cool because I got to start consulting on, like, I'd go back to Stanford, learn the toys, learn the BIM, learn the 3D, the 4D, the energy calculations, bring it back, work a regular job, work my regular 40-hour-a-week job because I, figured they weren't going to pay for research. But then in the evenings, I could start, putz around with my own stuff, right? Yeah. And so this kind of back and forth between, because I was doing then 3-month rotations. So this back and forth between a research institution and practice, right, is what led to what we have today, right? And I ended up completing the PhD in 6 years, which is average.
That's
awesome.
fantastic.
So with all that world travel and even in between academia, how has that helped you today? Now that everything's global, right? Especially what you do, you're global, right? So for me, I'm so used to just local construction. But with what you do, it's global. And so you traveling all those places, how has that helped you?
Oh, it's funny. It's like, that Steve Jobs said in that speech, right? So everything, makes sense when you look back. But The first thing is that I would cut class and go build things, right? Like I literally was like, man, I hate the structural engineering. It's driving me up the wall. It's boring. I would pick the coolest construction projects in the city, right? I would go knock on their door and I'd be like, hey, do you guys need any help? And they'd be like, you're 17, kid. Like, get off my construction site. And I'm like, no. What if I work for free? They'd be like, huh? And I'm like, no, I swear, like I'll work for free. And so they'd be like, yeah. And I tell them I was studying at this university and it's civil engineering, na. So they're like, okay, the kid's cute. We'll let him like stay.
Okay.
And most of them I think figured that, I'd be there for a couple of days and quit. But I'd do, full 30 days and I'd kind of waltz into the PM's office and I'd be like, hey, you want to give me some beer money? And
Yeah.
the answer was like, and I usually they'd give me like $100 or $200, for the month of work. But I picked up a lot of experience, and so I guess the pattern there is like, as long as you're doing something in the field, it somehow ends up being useful at some point.
Right.
And so to me, because I had worked on 3-4 projects before I graduated, and then I went to Afghanistan, which everybody thought was crazy, but those projects have 100% profit margin. So you can afford to have a 23-year-old kid with 100 people managing 5 projects. Right.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, suddenly I was like literally designing, building, I was like the master builder. I was architect, engineer. And so all of these, what I'm trying to explain is that later, right, the key insight was I was like, there's one, like everyone's like, oh, construction can't be simplified into like some generalized rule set. It can't be done, right? And the thing is, when you look at every other field, right, it's like every other field has gone through the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Somebody was like, no, I can, simplify it into some generalized rule set. I can digitize it. I can automate it. I can standardize it, right? And lots of people were like, no, it can't be done. It's too complicated. Factory, it's too complicated, right? But to me, I was like, the one thing I know is that a concrete column is a concrete column. I've poured them in Beirut and Afghanistan and Prague and the US. Like, there's one way to do it. I swear to God, it doesn't matter if you're in Bangladesh or Berlin, right?
Yeah.
Put up a steel cage, you put the formwork, you pour it, you wait for it to dry, you remove the formwork. Like, it's literally, that is it.
Yeah.
And so to answer the question, like the fact that I had done all these little odd jobs, right? Like by the time I started my PhD, I had, probably 12, 15 projects that I had like really actively worked on, managed, and so on, right?
Yeah.
And so to answer the question, like I think what it did was it kind of led me to see that, hey, there's a lot more standardization than people think.
Yeah.
And it's funny, when I started my PhD, I was like, I think there's a lot more standardization than people think. I didn't know you could standardize everything. By the time I finished the PhD, I was like, holy cow, look.
Look what I did.
Yeah.
It's funny, like how many times people said you're crazy. It kind of seems like every time someone says you're crazy, don't do it, you should probably do it. It's like going against the flow, right?
It's like, the thing I can tell you is, it's funny, like even till today, that hasn't happened in about 6 months, but like even, 8 months, like I have people like tell me it's not possible.
Right.
I'm like, we did it. Like, it's like, look at it. It's right here. Like run it, try it, test it.
Right.
I swear to God, it knows how to build. You can literally set up any project, put it in there, and it will build it 600 million different ways for you.
Wow.
Right.
Well, like, what do you mean? So to answer the question, that like, the one thing I would advise anyone to do is, if you are doing, here's what I've learned. If you're doing something and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Well, you probably like, you're not really squeezing all the potential out, right?
Right.
If you're doing something like, to answer your point, if you're doing something and every single person like without fail is like, hey man, this is the dumbest thing I've heard, maybe think about it.
Yeah.
If you want to go jump off a cliff and everybody is like, no, you're gonna kill yourself, like, do not do that.
Yeah. Right.
But like, for me, for example, like, because it has been, to put it mildly, challenging to build this. And so I, sometimes when I'm kind of, tired, I'll listen to some, pep talks from some, big entrepreneurs. And I remember, looking at Elon Musk, and because one of the things I was trying to figure out is, why is this darn thing so hard?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've been to Afghanistan, I climb mountains, so why is this thing just beating the hell out of me? And I think, Elon said, entrepreneurship is like chewing broken glass and staring into the abyss. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah.
And his point was that the reason it's so painful is that the company, every time you think of the company dying, it's like you're dying. Your limbic system kind of kicks in, and you have this sort of, survival kind of, reaction to it. And I was like, yeah, that completely makes sense. But the thing that he said that was interesting was that if you are sticking, like, if you want to achieve something large, you got to stick to it for a long time, and it's going to suck for a long time, and people are going to think that it's going to fail. And so the thing that he said that I thought was useful, at least to me, was, do you ultimately believe, right, that does it make sense, right? So from his perspective, he was like building spaceships, and it was like, if you get the darn thing to work and it's actually up there spinning around the planet, is that worth a lot of money, and are people going to pay you, and is it going to have a big impact? Right. That fundamentally is true, right? So I was like, with us, like, do you fundamentally believe the macro pieces of the puzzle, right? And here's the, I would always come back to this, right? At like 3 a.m. when I was like nauseous, right? It was like, is somebody somewhere going to figure this out?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Like, you cannot tell me that we're going to be managing construction using PDF printouts and, CPM scheduling 50 years from now.
Right.
Right. So somebody somewhere is going to figure out how to optimize the darn thing.
Did you do it was going to be you?
No, actually. And I truthfully, like, the problem was way too big to tackle at once. I didn't set out to solve it in the beginning, And I mean, the way it worked was I set out to solve a much smaller piece of the puzzle. I set out to solve space utilization. That was the thing. We were building the cruise ship terminals in Amsterdam. I was doing this, in the 6 months that I was raising money for the PhD, basically, right? Also a useful thing in that colloquially called an industrial PhD. You raise money, you're in 6 months, use it to pay for your program, graduate with no debt. Kind of a nice
bad idea.
Yeah, especially with the educational costs in the U.S., which are
crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's kind of nuts. But so I was on the project 6 weeks late, right, for the structural steel, right, or the steel in the foundation. That's what was 6 weeks late. The sub is basically, banging his fist on the table, going, I can't work any faster. I can't work any faster. And 50,000 euros of liquidated damages per day. You kind of imagine the mood in the room. Anybody in construction's been there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you walk into the project and it's a hairball, and you're realizing, like, oh crap, like, it's not one critical path, it's 5 or 6 or heaven forbid like 10, right? And so you're like, now what? And you're starting to realize, like, oh, and I've been there, right? Like, you kind of start to peel the onion, and you're realizing, oh, no, we're not in this much trouble. We're actually in this much trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's, one of the reasons we invented Alice, right? Like, and from the beginning, like, the software has to be nuclear proof. Like, it is not vaporware. It's not a photo sharing app. It's like, we are building something solid. Like, and what we would go to our clients when we would say, hey, we fixed this little piece. I know what your job is like. You got 50 balls in the air, and they're complicated. You're betting your career, your family's well-being, your company's well-being, right? Employees' well-being, all of that on this project succeeding. So when you go to Alice, if we tell you we solved this little piece, you can sleep soundly that piece is solved. There's a lot of other pieces that we haven't solved, but that piece is done. Right. So when I was, on that project, 50,000 euros per day, these guys are yelling. So I got up, looked out of the window, and I saw 100,000 square foot of space, 6 people standing. And to your point of, like, oh, it makes sense later. Like, I was 26, but I had already been on 16 projects, 20 projects, something like that. And I realized, that's where that, me working for free, all my friends were like, hey, that's stupid. Why are you working for free? Like, you should,
there it is again.
Yeah. Hanging out on the beach and drinking beer, right? Yeah. Which is fun pastime, right? But, suddenly, because I had, been on all these construction projects, I could pattern match, right? And that's kind of interesting. Like that in itself, it's like, oh, like I was like, hey, every project I've ever been on is empty. Like think about that. That's kind of like literally drive down the road, look at a project. It's never crawling with people.
No.
There's a pocket of, maybe one or two pockets of work, all this empty space just sitting there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was like, huh. Like, and it hit me like a lead brick. I was like, wait a minute. Like I snapped a photo, and that photo like motivated the research. So I was like, hey, well, are construction projects really empty? Well, I think so. Like everyone I've been on feels that way.
Yeah.
Like I remember in Afghanistan, my boss would come to the office, come to the site, and I remember thinking like, I have 63 people out there, but it doesn't look like we're doing anything. Like I wonder if he's going to be upset, like, hey, why aren't you guys working any faster? And like he walked through the site and he didn't say anything. I was like, oh, I guess this is what construction projects look like, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's like I started measuring, right? We took a camera, right? That's a cool thing about doing a PhD. You get to like tinker with stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really like fascinating. Like a lot of people are like, why do it? I'm like, it's like the only time in the world where your brain belongs to only you.
So true.
Oh, wow. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah.
Like
Very cool.
You don't earn. You're earning 24,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
Like you have no money, right?
Right.
But you wake up in the morning, you're like, huh, what do I want to think about today?
Yeah.
And you like flip through stuff, and like to me, it was like super fun, right? Like reading, Ballard, reading, lean construction planning, Toyota construction, production system, Ford production system, right? Like, and reading all of these, great minds that have gone through and like figured all of this, operations research stuff, and really kind of you get to sit there and pontificate on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings up probably the number one question you get all the time is the question about AI. For me in my brain, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around an industry that I've been around my whole life, and it's just ever changing, right? I mean, we have COVID, we have supply chain issues. Everywhere we turn, there's a new challenge, a new hurdle. How have you guys at Alice, and maybe kind of roll this into describing what Alice does for the construction worker, is how does that work when it's changing every minute of every day?
How does Alice help with that change is the question?
Yeah, and maybe not only how does it help, but how does it work with it changing so often, and maybe even going back to what we've been through with COVID and now supply chain and some of the challenges we have. I mean, when you're scheduling a project out, things now changed, right? We used to get things in X amount of time, and now it's quadruple that. So how does that work with Alice?
So the thing that we did with Alice, and this is the part that's kind of remarkable. Alice understands how to build stuff. So think about that. Alice knows what a crane is. Alice knows what a crew is. Alice knows what overtime is. Alice understands what a production rate is, right? So Alice is a generative simulator. Generative means that she goes through lots and lots of parameters, builds it lots of different ways, lots of sequences, adds a crane, removes a crane, et cetera, and simulator. So she actually like moves resources around, shuffles them through space and time to build your object, right? And so the way that we did that is we separated planning from scheduling, right? Or as we've learned, it's actually planning from simulating, right? Planning is setting up the rule set. So the reason I've sort of explained all that is that once you set up the rule set, Alice has built your project for you. That's the key difference, right? Like Alice now knows your project. So if you go to Alice and say, hey, this material got delayed, she simply rebuilds it with the delay. You can tell Alice, hey, rebuild it with the delay. And then you can say, resequence around that delay. You can say, try overtime to mitigate for the delay. Try overtime for steel workers in the month of October. Try a month of September, try both months, try add some steel crews, try remove steel crews, try add a crane, try like sky's the limit. You literally can change that parameter and hit resimulate.
Gotcha.
That's the thing we have.
Wow. And how would you, I know you've gotten this one too, is how would you define AI for your business? Because I know, AI probably has 50 different definitions, and it really probably is kind of maybe you need about 10 different definitions, right?
That's more.
Yeah, right. So I guess how would you define it for Alice?
Yeah, I think that, here's a piece of advice to anyone, listening, right? If somebody starts giving you flack about AI, smile and say, well, why don't you define artificial and why don't you define intelligence? Let's start there, right?
Okay.
And so they're not easy to do. The formal definition given by McCarthy, who was a Stanford professor, I think in the 60s, when he coined the term, was like computers solving problems that humans can solve, right? A vague definition. There's several different ways to define it, right? One way to define it is what technique are you using? So is it a search algorithm, a neural net, a multi-layered neural net, so on and so forth. So that's been in vogue or in fashion lately. I think maybe 3-4 years ago, neural nets were the big thing, right?
Yeah.
Neural nets, if I was to kind of explain in a nutshell what's going on there, here's a question: what makes a 3 a 3? Right? You know it's a 3, right? Somebody writes a 3, right? You know it, right? It's
Right.
You do kind of arches, right? But how do you teach a computer that? So one way to do it is to say, well, I'm going to tell the computer that there's an arch and it goes at this angle and it rotates by this much and it comes back down and it could be, sideways and this tilted and all these different rules. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
The other way to do it is to basically feed it through like this kind of randomized system, right? And so the way it works is that you've got pixels on a screen and each of those pixels is either 1 or 0, right? And so based on that, the computer has this function where it looks at those pixels and it has a database of 3s. So it kind of pattern matches, if that makes sense. I'm not getting into too much detail into how exactly that works, but the way what you'll notice with neural nets is that there's always a percentage of how good your algorithm. So you'll give it a database of 10,000 3s, and the computer's like, oh, I can now tell you what a 3 is, with 98% accuracy, 90% accuracy, with 85%. So those are always kind of the numbers about neural nets. So 3-4 years ago, that was kind of the big thing. So everyone was like, oh, AI is neural nets. And the reason that's significant is because as you update the database of 3s, that function of how it interprets 3s starts to change.
Right.
I don't tend to like that definition too much because neural nets were cool 3-4 years ago. Now they call them machine learning, right? And there's going to be something else down the line, right?
Right.
Another the definition of how does it work? So like, does it learn from the data that it's looking at? So does the fundamental algorithm change? Yeah, that's a good definition, right?
Yeah.
And so is the algorithm changing itself from the data feeding it?
Right. Yeah, that makes
That's
sense.
another definition. The third one is what does the software understand? Right? Like what, if it's artificial intelligence, what concepts does it understand? Right? So, let's sort of say chess AI would understand what a rook is, right? Whereas Alice understands what a crane, a crew, a production rate, etc. are, right?
Right.
Those are kind of 3 definitions right there. The last one's kind of a little more wishy-washy, is like, what can it do that we couldn't do before? Like, so it can generate 600 million scheduling options, right? So those are sort of 4 definitions. Yeah, it's up. Like, I tend to find that having worked in the field, like, hey guys, they're algorithms, okay?
Right.
Like, there's nothing out there that is going to like wake up and like doesn't have it, right? They're algos, right? And there's a lot of very smart people working on making those algos better and better and better, right?
Yeah.
Full stop, right?
Yeah.
The one thing I heard is AI is whatever the latest thing that computers can do that we haven't been able to do thus far. Because suddenly like AI was natural language processing,
Right.
driving cars, right? Like AI is the latest thing that we couldn't do before, right? And it's a little like, unfortunately, we have AI in the name of the company. Alice is an acronym, Artificial Intelligence Construction Engineering, right? I think it's become a little bit overused. People slap AI on the box for absolutely everything, right?
Right.
But yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned, right? In the sense that lots of people have lots of different definitions, right? And sure, they're all right. At the end of the day, algorithms are algorithms.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I love that you've taken though something that Jeremy was saying that the industry is always changing, and in some ways it is just based on some variables that we always have because we're human beings. But I love that you've taken something that really hasn't been changed in a long time,
Yeah.
and just made something that you can see looking into the future is going to be used, without question.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So looking into the future now, picturing that Alice is being used across the world, what is the legacy that you would like to leave? Is it Alice? Is it growing even bigger? Are your sights set higher? When you think of your legacy, what do you want to leave behind?
I'll give you like a maybe poetic twist to it, right? I'd like that by the time my kids grow up, when I'll have some, to be able to say, hey, the one thing you should do is construction, and the sense that, hey, this is the field that's now cutting edge and bleeding edge, and lots of exciting things are happening. There's lots of tech and innovation, so on and so forth, right? Kind of interesting that people tend to view like all of this change as like, oh, I'm scared. Like, what an incredible opportunity. Like, holy cow, right? Like,
Yeah.
the field is like, what's happening in construction today is what happened to manufacturing in the 80s. Like, if you look back historically, if you look at factories, right? I know from my grandmother in Europe, right? Like, factories were shitty places to work.
Yeah, no doubt.
Like people would be on a production line screwing bolts for 16 hours a day, right? With not much light, and it was not a great place to work. And today, when you think of manufacturing, it's become this high tech industry, and that's happening in construction. It's an incredible opportunity. So to answer the question, I want to leave behind a field that is more capable of being a cutting edge, high tech, research focused field. That's
Yeah.
what
I love that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rene, we know you spent some time with us. We really appreciate it. We want to end on a couple of just fun things, and we call it the zone out little session where we kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit. And I know you kind of answered this a little bit, but our question number one is, as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? So I guess this would be before the civil engineering came into play. When you were playing around as a kid, what did you want to be?
It's a good question. I wanted to be a lawyer at one point, so thank God that didn't happen. Yeah, I think law was a big one at one point.
Okay.
But physicist, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that was like quantum mechanics. That was I
Okay.
thought really, but yeah, as a physicist, you get to sit in a lab and you don't get to be out there and like do stuff, right? It's just a lot of lab work. So
Yeah, totally.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
If you had your own talk show, who would you want to be your first guest?
Ooh,
Living or past?
like from the past. I would have liked to talk to Eiffel.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that I think, like, yeah, just asking how he thought about building that darn thing, and
Yeah.
because I mean, if I got my facts straight, like he sort of said, hey, okay, I'll fund it, but then I'm going to charge people tickets to go up it.
Yeah.
And the city said, yeah, sure. But when they were building it, I mean, people must have thought it's the dumbest thing in the world. Like, why on earth build a large? Like, how much steel are you going to use for that?
Yeah. Well, you need people like that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one is, who is the most influential person in your life?
Oh, most influential person. Well, there's two. I had two advisors at Stanford, Professor Martin Fisher and Dr. John Kuntz. So those two really, between the two of them, pushed me beyond the edge, right?
Yeah.
They consistently failed me. And so that was, I think, the one thing that they did really well. So I'd have to go back and redo it till they finally approved.
Yeah. Well, Rene, we really appreciate your time. We know what you're doing is great. We appreciate you pushing the limits to innovation and construction. We need people like you, and it's just fun to be kind of, on the cusp of something really cool. And so we appreciate your time and we wish you much success at Alice Technologies. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Ray. And we need people like you. So really excited. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Renee.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
The people that we interview and talk with, we have limited time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm constantly looking at the clock going, no, it was a little bit longer, a little bit longer.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like with him, what's so unique about a person like that is you have somebody who has, yes, been in the construction industry on the actual active side of it as a career and a job, but then has but is also a lifelong learner and doesn't ever want to stop at just, whatever is happening in his day to day. It's like, well, how can I improve this? How can I make this more efficient, more cost effective? And so they're looking, just the way I feel very inspired right now, the way that he.
Yeah. I wish you could go build Alice.
I know.
But you can't. No, I
Not
think
really my wheelhouse. I'm so
No.
thankful that we have people like that.
Yeah,
and it is great. Like, it's great to talk to people like that. They're just a different type of way of thinking. And, everybody has different skills, and his is just.
Yeah, it's hard to understand and grasp it all. But I think the thing that I love the most is that he loves what he does, and I can relate to that in what I'm doing. But it's just like a person that, man, he loves to talk about it. I can tell that he would talk about it all day, every day, because he's proud of it. He should be, but he also loves what he does. Like he did the right thing. He went into the right field at the right time, and I think that's rare. I think a lot of people fall into something that they don't love. He fell into something that he loves, and because he loves it, he's going to make some great things.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And everybody in the industry will benefit from it.
Yeah. So, that was my favorite part, is just being kind of like, oh man, he loves this. He loves this stuff.
Yes.
And that's cool. And it also left me with a little bit of hope. I've been down the last few weeks with a labor shortage and with everything that's going on from a stress standpoint, but then you look at this and you're like, oh, okay, this is going to replace, not necessarily people, but make us more efficient. And it's not going to replace people. That's what I keep wanting to make sure people are clear with. It's just going to change what we have to do. Instead of being on a job site with that many workers, now we're going to have to manage, maybe the robot part of life and some of the other things that are going to be making our lives more efficient. We're going to have to manage those. Yeah. So it's not going to replace people. It's just going to make our jobs a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. I'd love to, before we kind of go off, his final answer. So the answer to who is the most influential person. And I love that. I love what the truth behind his answer. And I think that when he was talking about his professors, I love that he said, because they failed him so often. And that is how we grow. And I think we oftentimes, especially in construction, and for those who are new as an entrepreneur or starting your own business, or, when you get a customer that just drags you down, can feel like I'm in the wrong business. Whoever thought I could do this?
Right.
But the fact is that growth comes from mistakes and growth comes from failure. And as long as you don't stop, and as long as you, like he said, when you're down, that you just keep going. I know that's cliche and easier said than done, but I love that, someone who has achieved something so industry changing, can say that the people who have influenced him the most are the ones who also, didn't let him get by with going like, hey, you're great all the time. Everything you put out is perfect. They actually forced him to just
get better.
Yeah, get better and better. And
it's
inspiring.
And he said these are the two people who challenged him the most, right? And I think we struggle with that as humans, is that we want to make everybody like us. But for a professor and someone like that, that's not their job. Their job is to challenge you and make you better. And think about it just being parents. Like, we're not there to be their buddy. We are there to challenge them and make them better. And hopefully they'll be better than us. And that's what's cool is like he immediately said, "Oh, it's these two guys." And not that they were probably the most enjoyable people for him to be around. It was because they helped mold him into who he is today.
Right.
And very cool stuff.
Yeah.
We had
so much.
we had a great time, Renee, and thank you so much for listening to In the Zone podcast. I have been Jeremy. I still am Jeremy, and
Valerie.
we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to In the Zone with Jeremy and Valerie Owens. Be sure to subscribe to In the Zone and stay in the know with the best minds in the construction industry. To nominate an innovator or change maker in the construction industry, connect with your management peers, and stay up to date with construction industry news, be sure to visit usconstructionzone.com.